Welcome to this lecture on synoptic gospel formation. Today we're going to talk about the way in which the synoptic gospels are different from the Gospel of John. There are four gospels in the New Testament, but they are not the only gospels which exist. In fact, there are gospels that deal with other characters who are named in the New Testament. This first slide talks about the difference between the synoptic gospels and John. The synoptic gospels are Matthew, Mark, and Luke. The fourth gospel is John. Matthew, Mark, and Luke are called the synoptics because they look very similar. There are very similar stories, there are very similar quotations, and they involve one trip to Jerusalem. There is only one trip in the synoptic gospels that Jesus makes, and in fact the plot of the gospels is Jesus' trip from his hometown in the district of Galilee to Jerusalem at the end of his life, where he is arrested and executed. Now, the Gospels started with being written with the Gospel of Mark, which was probably written around 70 CE, just after or at the end of the first Jewish revolt. For more information on that, check out my presentation on the first presentation on the history of the New Testament, the historical timeline. Now, in the Synoptic Gospels, there are a number of parables. Parables are stories which are not true. They are simply told to illustrate a deeper theological point. Some of the Gospels parables include the story of the Good Samaritan, the story of the prodigal son, and various sayings of Jesus. Matthew and Luke have a great deal of material that Mark doesn't, and they also have a great deal of material in common. We'll talk about that in just a second. Mark seems to have written his gospel first, but there were certain parts of his gospel which seemed to be lacking to the authors of Matthew, and Luke. So Mark does not have any beginning of Jesus' story, such as his birth narrative. Matthew and Luke both have that. Mark does not have a genealogy telling Jesus' family line. Matthew and Luke have both of those. Mark lacks a story at the end of the gospel talking about Jesus's appearance after his resurrection to the disciples themselves. The original version of Mark does not have that. The original version ends at verse 8 with some later added material, which most certainly is not original to the Gospel of Mark. So that is the difference between the Synoptics and the Gospel of John. John has 3 different trips to Jerusalem, which is part of the reason why the church has traditionally held that Jesus' ministry was 3 years long. But Mark, Matthew, and Luke do not have 3 trips. They only have 1 trip in their Gospels. So that is some of the information on how the Synoptic Gospels are similar and how they were formed.